Welcome to Star Citizen Retrospective, commonly known around the world as SCR, hosted by yours truly, Space Tomato. This is a show where I take a look at Star Citizen topics from weekly shows a year ago and compare them to the progress that we can see on those same topics today. It's a little bit of a different way of keeping track of what's actually being worked on in Star Citizen right now. I hope you can get something out of this week's episode. Let's get right into it. Calling All Papys, Part 2. This is a special episode of Calling All Devs with Star Citizen Live Game Director Todd Papy. The first question for Todd was inquiring about the Hull C and what was going on with it at the time. According to Todd, the ship design itself was actually all done, the art was finished and signed off on, but there were some code issues with the physics grid expanding as the ship expanded, and they also definitely needed to get ship-to-station docking capabilities working as well as larger cargo containers. We can see these things coming up on the roadmap, and we've seen some sneak peeks of the newer SCU types, but given the prior mentioned issues and an economy that's only just now finding its feet, this ship is still a little ways off, but not too far hopefully. Next, Todd was asked about the distance between Port Olisar and Hurston, and how it was too far for ships' quantum jumps, and how many rest stops would be in between these two destinations in order for players to stop and refuel at. Now you may be sitting there thinking, wait a second, I don't have to refuel when I fly between those two places. That is because their plans changed a little bit when it came to rest stops and traveling those far distances. Initially, they were thinking they would have around 8 rest stops between Crusader and Hurston for internal testing purposes, and they were actually predicting you wouldn't be able to make the trip in a single jump in smaller ships. That idea did not sit well with the community, and it's currently not the way the game plays out. Currently, you can make the jump with any ship, it just takes longer based on which ship and which quantum drive you're using. That being said, there are not 8 rest stops in between these 2 points, and there's currently no requirement to refuel in between these 2 planets. I doubt that will ever be necessary, but things can change with this game. We are currently missing certain types of rest stops and other types of space stations that are going to definitely fill out this blank space in between the planets, so there are going to be many other reasons to stop in these spaces besides refueling. But as of now, nobody has to worry about how far away Hurston is from Port Olisar, and whether their ship will be able to make the trip during a quantum jump. For the next question, it's important to know that John Pritchett was the previous developer who was working on the flight model pre-3.3. He left the company last summer as the work he had set out to complete was finished. This question was from a backer who was wondering when we might see a fix for the current state of ESP, which was in a troubled place a year ago. ESP, otherwise known as Enhanced Stick Precision, is a system meant to support players using a joystick setup. That being said, it is on by default and can be disabled for mouse users. The new flight model team actually was able to make some improvements to ESP for 3.2, according to Todd, but throughout the following 3 patches, we also saw some additional changes. Unfortunately, at this point in time, it's still in a pretty troubled place. It can cause your aim to stick to targets, and it's associated with a couple of frustrating bugs. The devs are aware that it needs work, but we don't have any apparent fixes due in the immediate future. Hopefully something will come along in the next year for Squadron 42. The last question for Todd was about the Prospector and its filtration system, and whether it would be able to use the filter on the top back of the ship to blast out unused rock while mining. Todd explained that first they wanted to get the initial system of mining polished and include asteroid mining in the game, both of which have been done, but that filtration system is still nowhere to be seen and is not currently listed on the roadmap. Unfortunately, it appears that since Alpha 3.4, mining has been put on the back burner, along with a few other expected gameplay loops. These gameplay loops seem to have been pushed off in lieu of AI improvements as well as priority Squadron 42 gameplay aspects. I expect to see some improvements to mining maybe next year, but I'm not really holding my breath for that, as I'm sure they want to get out the initial implementations of salvage, repair, refueling, and exploration, some of which are actually already on the roadmap. This week's episode of Around the Verse took place on July 26th, and started out with a feature on Scramble races, a new type of death race that was being implemented into the game in Alpha 3.3 and improved in 3.4. These races were FPS weapon free, however, you could use the vehicle weapons, and they were hosted on both the moons around Crusader and later Hurston, as well as in space around these areas. I tried to start a Scramble race for myself. I got my Nox, I got ready to race, I double checked to make sure I was in the correct place, and then I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And I realized there was a problem with these races in that you have to have a group of people ready to join the race before you actually start it, or else nothing happens. I think these might have been added a bit prematurely, but it's nice that they are there if you do want to race, and you have a group of people ready to join you. Next we got an early look at the rental system that was being implemented into Star Marine. It looks like some of the item statistics are still missing, however the VMA and PMA apps also have that problem, and I think it might depend on an underlying system. We then got a look at some of the additional work going into derelict ships scattered about in the PU for us to discover. Derelicts are an interesting topic. While there are quite a few in the PU, they don't have the tangible feel I think CIG was going for with the initial concept. I expected a bit more variety at this point, as we saw quite a bit of progress finished in a July of 2017 episode of Around the Verse, more than 2 years ago at this point, which I'll link down below because it's a really great watch. And others are also wondering where these derelicts are as well. Earlier this year, Morphologist made a video giving his feelings on this subject. I think after seeing what work was going into derelicts and what plans they had for the gameplay aspect, many people have been a bit disappointed by what could have been. Of course, we all know this aspect will be improved. I remember at the beginning of the year we saw moonside NPCs on the roadmap, and currently you can find economic generated missions with a suspect thumbnail, which might be hinting at something. But I've learned not to completely trust the thumbnails. And who knows, maybe there are some big undiscovered wrecks out there still waiting for us to find them. But at this point, explorers and traders want reasons to find these wrecks, and so far we don't have many. So here's to the future. Those of you who had watched my show previously know that they had told us to wait and see more 300i news, and here are the first concept images we were getting to see of the ship. As you can see, the final product actually ended up looking quite similar to these concept designs, with a little more flair thrown in. The 300i was the original ship I backed for, and I think they did just enough with this for me to want to stay with my 325 and continue to improve it. Next, we checked in with the audio team to hear how props were creating noises as they interacted with the environment around them. I really liked these sounds. The sound of these things bouncing and sliding across the ground sounded really good. And I tried to replicate this myself, but I think we're still missing a couple systems to have this work in-game. After this, we saw some early concept work for the Covalic shipping hubs being placed around the PU. These are currently in the game and they are used for receiving and delivering packages on missions. It's a pretty decent system and it usually works, though sometimes can be kind of glitchy. Then we saw some concept art for the Lorville transit stations, which besides looking a little blue and black and white, looks pretty similar to what we got in the game.
Security reserves the right to search travelers.
And after that, they did a short feature on the customs area in Hurston at the Lorville landing site, which hasn't gotten functionality added to it yet. However, the space is there and you can see it if you would like in the game. It looks pretty good. Definitely needs some work to be done to it. And it looks like we're going to get some functionality added to that probably later on with the security systems. So as of right now, there's not much that has been done on the side of actual customs other than the environment, but we should see it soon. TM? Finally, we stopped by the Lorville Habs one more time to see the early white box phase work that was being done on them. During this episode, they were highlighting the cramped nature of the Lorville habs and how they would feel a little bit too small, but just big enough for the average Lorville worker who, let's be real, doesn't really care about space so much as just getting some fresh air. But there's no way we can expect habs this size on Microtech, right? Those are all luxury, right? Anyways, the Lorville habs did end up looking a lot like they did in this episode, and haven't really changed since, for better or worse. I'm hoping we get some more varied habs soon, especially when we see a much nicer area in the game, like Microtech. Now, on to Reverse the Verse, posted on July 28th. This episode had our host, Jared, playing Star Citizen live with the lore team. It was a pretty laid-back session, a lot of joking around, but there were a couple points that they did make that I think we can go over here. At one point, they spoke about delivery missions being created dynamically by the economy, supply, and demand system to populate the mission system. They spoke about it as if it was still a ways off, so it's not surprising that we haven't seen that fully implemented into the game, but they did also mention the tools they were working on at the time would allow them to simply label a mission type, and that mission would populate the universe in a specific location linked to that mission type. For example, the illegal drug grab missions that are available only in places with unlisted drug labs. And you'll probably get more waste removal missions in the Hurston sector, if they actually care to log them. They also mentioned the possibility of counter missions, which we just recently saw implemented into this latest patch. At another point during the episode, a question was asked regarding the shared rewards for players who wanted to tackle missions together. Jared said that this was planned, however, they did not have a timetable for it. Honestly, at this point, I don't know if they still have a timetable for it. He suggested that it may be either part of Tier 1 or Tier 2 of the group system, but we've seen group systems V2, and we've seen group systems V4, so when is V5, I guess? I think at the very least we will see reward sharing and UEC transfers with the inclusion of the Encounting app next year, but again, it's hard to tell what actually will come with that app. And finally, for those of you who aren't aware, the in-lore explanation for sound in space in this game is that the computers in our ships and suits can replicate the sound for us. So to sell that idea, they mention that they have talked to the audio team about the possibility of having that audio feedback deteriorate with damage. That hasn't been touched on yet. It seems like a feature that'll probably be pretty far off, but we did see some of what interference or EMPs can cause to happen in your ships, and this audio degradation feedback may very well be tied into V1 or V2 of that interference system, or V10. And that does it for this week's episode of Star Citizen Retrospective. I want to thank you guys for joining me on this one once again, and let you know that I am always open to feedback and looking to make improvements in this show. Keep an eye out for next week's episode, where we'll be talking about the 600i, audio and mining improvements, FOIP work, and a special Reverse the Verse episode with Chris Roberts, where we'll get some important questions answered. Hope to see you guys at the next one. Have a good week.